Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in. Because the origin of Brazil's oldest and most powerful criminal organization, the Comando Vermelho, or Red Command, is incredibly ironic. You see, the groundwork for this massive syndicate was actually laid entirely by accident, by a military dictatorship. Today, we're really going to focus on how the Comando Vermelho emerged, look at its structure through a social lens, and trace its massive expansion across all 27 federal units of Brazil.
To understand how they grew into this transnational powerhouse, we're going to trace their evolution through 6 distinct phases: the cradle of crime, their statute in society, their franchise structure, the trafficking economy, geopolitical expansion, and finally, the state of war. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Cradle of Crime. We're looking at the 1970s and the Candido Mendez Penal Institute.
So back in the 1970s, the military regime makes this fateful and frankly disastrous administrative decision at the maximum security Candido Mendez prison on Ilha Grande. Basically, hoping to break the spirit of their opposition, they locked up middle-class, left-wing political dissidents in the exact same brutal cell block, Block B, as highly dangerous common. But, instead of breaking them, it sparked this totally unexpected alliance. The common criminals and the Marxists teamed up to survive guard brutality. The criminals actually absorbed the dissidents' teachings on collective organization, asymmetric warfare, and social solidarity. It was the ultimate unintended consequence.
And this alliance didn't just stay behind bars. In 1979, an amnesty law released the political mentors back into regular society. But guess what? They left behind a highly organized, militarily trained criminal syndicate. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect for them, because they were now perfectly positioned to ride the wave of the explosive.
Section 2. The Statute and Society. This covers ideology, narco-culture, and social control.
Now, as the Comando Vermelho broke out of the prisons and expanded into Rio's incredibly neglected favelas, they leaned heavily on those early ideological teachings to win over the locals. They didn't just rule with an iron fist, right? They established these strict internal statutes. They funded prison escapes and even paid pensions for widows by collecting a mandatory 10% robbery tax, which they called the dízimo. Basically, they stepped in to provide social order where the state was completely absent. They used the motto peace, justice, and freedom to really paint themselves as the ultimate defenders of the socially oppressed.
And a huge part of how they maintain that control is through what we call narco-culture. It's basically this cultural and aesthetic phenomenon in marginalized areas that totally exalts military power and financial flexing. The Comando Vermelho actively funds local baile funk street parties and sponsors music that glorifies the faction and its fallen members. And it works. It's an incredibly effective tool to recruit disenfranchised youth who just don't have access to formal social mobility. It creates this deeply rooted loyalty.
Section 3. The franchise structure. Let's look at how this decentralized criminal syndicate operates.
So the real secret to their resilience, they don't actually operate like a traditional top-down mafia. It's way more decentralized. It's almost like a franchise model. You have local favela bosses, known as donos, who manage their own specific territories with a ton of autonomy. Meanwhile, the top prison leaders, the cupola, they issue these broad strategic directives right from inside maximum security cells. And then at the very bottom, you've got the olleros and fogueteros, usually teenagers, acting as lookouts, using radios or even fireworks to warn everyone when the cops show up. This setup means the organization easily survives even when the very top bosses get taken down.
And honestly, being locked up rarely stops their influence anyway. Take O Professor, one of the original founders from the 70s who actually wrote their code of conduct. Or look at historical leaders like Fernandinho Beramar, who famously built the Colombian FARC, or top strategist Marcinho VP. Both of those guys are currently incarcerated, yet they continue to exert immense operational control from inside federal prisons to this very day.
Moving on to Section 4, the trafficking economy. We're talking everything from bank robberies to digital fintech. The 1980s cocaine trade definitely built their empire, but today they operate like a massive, diversified corporation. Is still their bread and butter, but they've also literally replaced the state in their territories by monopolizing basic utilities. We're talking internet, gas, water. They tax all of it. They charge security fees to residents and even to delivery apps trying to enter the neighborhood. In the north, they're heavily involved in illegal mining, logging, and fishing. They're using cryptocurrencies and even building their own fake fintech platforms like T4 Bank. It is a highly sophisticated digital laundering operation.
Section 5. Geopolitical expansion. This brings us to transnational borders and the Amazon route.
All of that immense wealth has fueled a hyper-aggressive geopolitical expansion. Remember how we mentioned earlier that they've expanded across all 27 of Brazil's federal units? This is what that looks like in practice. They are fighting a brutal, multi-front war, often against their biggest rivals, the PCC, to lock down critical logistics nodes. They've violently taken over river routes from the FDN and Amazons. They've secured key land corridors for Bolivian drugs in Mato Grosso and rapidly expanded into the favelas of Salvador Bahia, starting in 2020. Internationally, it's just as intense. They maintain fixed bases for cocaine labs and marijuana logistics in Bolivia and Paraguay, and they're even pushing into French Guiana to open up fresh trafficking routes directly into Europe.
Which brings us to Section 6, the state of war. Let's examine territorial control and hemispheric security. This relentless expansion has essentially triggered a permanent state of urban warfare, and the balance of power is constantly shifting. Just look at the data. Back in 2005, they controlled over half of the market. Then, during the 2010s, the state actually had some real success reclaiming ground with their UPP pacification police units. But, that system eventually collapsed. And in the resulting power vacuum, the Comando Vermelho came roaring back. As of 2025 and 2026, they've violently reclaimed roughly 52% of the entire Rio metropolitan area.
121. That number right there is the tragic death toll of the October 2025 Operation Containment. The state sent 2,500 heavily armed police officers into the northern favelas of Rio, and they were literally met with paramilitary barricades and cartel drones. Think about that for a second. It ended up being the state's entire history, and somehow the primary cartel leaders still managed to escape. Human rights experts widely mark the whole operation as a devastating strategic failure.
And the international community is absolutely taking notice. In June 2026, the U.S. State Department formally designated the Comando Vermelho as a specially designated global. The sheer scale of their paramilitary weaponry, their absolute territorial control, and those massive cross-border operations we talked about, it's elevated this conflict way beyond a domestic security issue. It is now a matter of international counterterrorism. Both the US and Argentina are classifying them alongside global terror networks, which is sparking some seriously complex diplomatic debates about sovereignty and security.
The architecture of the Comando Vermelho is vast, it's complex, and it is deeply, deeply rooted in the history of Brazil itself. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If a group that was literally born in the darkest cells of a military dictatorship thrives today by exploiting structural inequality and providing for the socially abandoned, can raw military force ever actually dismantle it? Or does the solution require addressing the very inequality that gives them their power in the first place? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it helped you wrap your head around a truly fascinating and deeply complex topic.